Welcome to this Wise Owl tutorial on sorting and filtering using OData in Power Automate. Here's what you'll learn during the tutorial. So we'll begin by looking at what OData actually is and why it matters to you, why should you care? And then we'll look at setting up some example data for this tutorial for Excel and SharePoint. What I'll then do is show how to use OData to sort and filter Excel data, and then we'll do the same thing with SharePoint. The reason for doing them differently is each one has its own issues, and those issues are different for Excel and for SharePoint. What I'll then do is show some advanced filtering techniques. We'll look at dynamic filtering, so you can use a variable to hold parameters. And finally, we'll look at experimental features, which is a way to make it easier to write OData filters. And at this point, you'll probably curse me and wish I'd shown you this at the beginning of the tutorial rather than at the end. But that's enough of looking at me. I think it's time for me to vanish, as I tend to at this point in the tutorial. And let's get started. So let's start with what OData is and why it's important. So I've gone to odata.org. It's the first thing which comes up when you search for OData, and I presume the most important site. And what this tells me is that OData means Open Data Protocol. And it's basically a convention whereby you can get information from a website and apply filters and sorting. I'm sure it does a great deal more than that, but for our purposes, that's what we're interested in. As to why it matters, have a look at this flow. I've called it example of inefficient flow, and that's because it is. It's based on a SharePoint list of 1,200 films. We'll come back to that in a bit. And it doesn't apply any filters. So if you look at the OData information, the filter query here is empty. And what that means is it will get back all 1,200 films. I don't like this because I know it's going to run very slowly on the cloud. Microsoft seems to sulk when you apply or when you send large requests through, and the responses get slower and slower. But Microsoft don't like it either. You can see there's a flow checker here at the top with a red symbol next to it. And if I click on that, it's got a warning telling me that if I use get items without an OData filter, I'll have slower performance. And if I ignore this and try running it, the first time it gives me a warning too. So that's what OData is. Let's now have a look at the data sets we'll use for our examples for SharePoint and Excel. So here are the examples we're going to use for this tutorial. There's a file attached to this video called Films with Genres, and you'll be able to get that by looking at the program notes for the YouTube video, and it'll tell you which Wise Owl webpage you need to go to download this file. So that's in Excel, and what you can do is bring that into both Excel Online and also SharePoint. A very quick reminder of how to do that. For SharePoint, what you could do is choose to create a new list. You could then choose to get your list from Excel, choose to upload a file, choose this file called Films with Genres. It contains two tables. Make sure you choose the films table, and you could click on next and proceed, and it would create the list. But I've already done that, and it's called films on the left hand side. And if I click on that, you'll see the contents of the list. As to Excel, you can create a new folder possibly. I created one called OData, and within that you could choose to add a new file. Upload a file, choose file upload, choose to get the file films with genres, and you can then upload that. And if I now click on that, you'll see the contents of the workbook, complete with two worksheets, films and genres. So that's what we're going to use. So that's the data we're going to use for this tutorial. What we'll now do is focus on Excel and then on SharePoint. So to illustrate how you can sort and filter data using OData with Excel, let's create a new flow. It's an instant cloud flow. What I'll do is call it OData and Excel, manually trigger it, and we'll add a step to get the information from Excel, and I'll choose list rows present in a table, and as always go through the process of choosing where I'm getting my information from. OneDrive for business, and then OneDrive, choose my file which is in the OData folder, and then choose my table which will be the films table. And then what I'll do is add a new step beneath it to display the results of this using an HTML table. And I will choose to display from the values from the list of data returned from my previous step. Choose custom columns, And what I'm going to do is display the title, the genre, and the nominations. You can actually just click in the header and then go on to the next column to create rows. But if you do this, they don't actually have any headings. So it's probably a good idea to go back in and put the headings in. So I'll call my film name nominations. That's how many Oscars a film was nominated for, and the genre. And we're good to go. So that's a fairly straightforward flow. What I'm going to do now is show some things you can do with OData. And to be honest, what I'm really doing is highlighting the various problems you'll have. Well, let's start with ordering, and let's do something which I think probably will work. We're going to sort them by genre. So that's that column there. So I can choose genre, and I can type ascending, ASC, or descending. I'm going to go for descending, DESC. And at this point, if you program in SQL, you'll have the illusory feeling that this is going to be just like SQL. It isn't. So now what I could do is save this and run it. And when I run this, what I'm expecting to see is all the films for, I think it's Westerns is the first genre in reverse alphabetical order come first. And then I'll work backwards through the alphabet. Let's see if that actually works. It's done. And if I have a look at the output from that in my HTML table, then you should see I've got, excuse me, 3 columns. But strangely, I'm not seeing the results. Now, I've had this before, and I just wonder whether it's because I've got this file open. It suggested last time that wasn't the problem, but let's actually try it again. So what I'll do is try running this again. I haven't made any changes whatsoever apart from closing down that file. And this time, has it run successfully? It has. So maybe that was a problem. So you can see that I've got my Westerns first, followed by my war, followed by my thriller. It's all worked. What I'd like to do now is to change this. So I sort it by genre. I'll change that to ascending. And then within genre, I'll sort it by the title. This is valid OData. There's nothing wrong with it. But I don't actually think it's going to work. Let's try it and see if my pessimism is justified. If I try running this, and if I run my flow and choose done, I was right. My flow run has failed. And the reason it's failed is because almost unbelievably, only a single expression is supported in the order by clause for Excel. When we get onto SharePoint, we'll see that's not true. Excel seems to be far more restrictive about what you can actually do with it as a data source. So you simply can't do what I just tried to do. So let's try something else. I'll just go editing that. And what I want to do is to filter it, or rather sort it by the runtime. Now the runtime has got a spacing. So let's see if we can do that. I'll delete my original order by. I have not found any way to do this, whether in filtering or sorting. Single quotation marks like that don't work. Square brackets like that don't work. Replacing the space with an underscore doesn't work. I can't solve this problem. It appears to be the case that the only way to solve it is to go into the Excel spreadsheet and change the heading to not have any spaces in. I simply can't solve it. So if anybody else can, let me know the answer. So that's sorting. Let's have a look at some filtering. So what I'm going to do is filter it to show all the films which got at least 10 Oscar nominations. So I can type in nominations is, let's say 10, more than 10. So I can type nominations is greater than 10. And let's see if that works. It's the first thing you would instinctively try, particularly if you come from any sort of computing background, which I imagine most of you do. Does it work? It's looking good, but not now. And the problem is the greater than character isn't valid. And the reason I show you this is otherwise you probably won't believe me. What you have to do instead is type in GT for greater than, or GE for greater than or equal to, LT for less than, or LE for less than or equal to, EQ for equals, and NE for not equals to. Later on in this, I may bring up a slide showing that in this tutorial. So that should now work, shouldn't it? Let's try it. I'll save that, and then if I test it by clicking the test button, choose to run it, and it's failed again. This time it's failed because in Excel, only single equal and not equal to operations are supported. You can't even do comparisons. Again, I could barely believe it when I saw this. So the answer to how you do what I was trying to do is you don't. Just to prove you can actually get filters working, let's change that to nominations is equal to 10, a far less useful query, admittedly. And if I run this, you will see it lists out all the films which got exactly 10 Oscar nominations. But whether that's a useful thing to be able to do, I'm not so sure. And you can see them listed at the bottom there. So these are some of the limitations of working with Excel. What I'll do now is look at some ways and limitations of working with SharePoint, and then we'll look at some more advanced filtering you can do in both environments. So what I'm going to do now is pretty much the same thing for SharePoint, and what we'll discover is there's probably just as many issues, but they're different issues. So there's my SharePoint list, and what I'll do is create a new flow, an instant cloud flow. I'll call it OData and SharePoint. And what it will do is get some data from SharePoint. I'll use the get items action. Choose my SharePoint site, waiting the customary second or two for that to appear. Choose my list, which is going to be films. And then I'm going to add a new step beneath it. Now there's two reasons for what I'm doing to create an HTML table. One is I want to be able to output something, so that's the conventional reason. But the second reason is if I choose to show custom columns, then what I can do is get information about what these columns are called. So I'll start with the title and then have the genre and then have the nominations. Title's there, that's good. That's where I'd expect it to be. Genre's there, that's good. That's where I'd expect it to be. Nominations, presumably it's just underneath. No, it's not. It's the order of this is just absolutely bizarre. Occasionally it's alphabetical, and then it veers off into some other weird order. So by the time you get down here, you're thinking, clearly I've misunderstood things. It's not going to be there. But if you have the confidence to keep going, and you really do need a lot of confidence, you'll eventually get some more fields. And there's the nominations, which I've just actually put in the wrong place. I'll put it in the right place. So that's weird. Quite why it shuffles the fields like that, I couldn't tell you. So that's my basic flow. What I now want to do is sort it by genre, just like we did with Excel. I'll go into my properties here, and I will choose order by, type in genre and ascending. And again, this is something I just want to show you because I'll just save that. Because again, you might not believe that this isn't going to work without actually seeing it. But those of you with a good memory will remember why it's not going to work. You can see it's coming up with a warning there. That's because although I'm sorting by the data, I'm not actually filtering it. So Microsoft are unhappy that I'm going to be downloading lots and lots of rows. I can live with that if you can. So my flow's run, but it's crashed. And the reason it's crashed, is it going to tell me this? I think it will if I wait patiently long enough. I think it will come up with a message on the right-hand side that it can't find the field called genre. And the reason it can't find it is because the field isn't called genre. No, it just says failed to fetch. It looks like it's called genre, but you remember that the only true way to find out what it is, just going to editing that, is to let your mouse linger over it, Power Automate anyway, and it's actually called field_6. So although I quite like the sound of genre ascending, I'm going to choose field 6 ascending instead. And I'm going to subsort it by the title, which is actually called title. That's a special name for a SharePoint list field. And whereas this didn't work in Excel because you can only sort it by one key at a time, I'm pretty confident in SharePoint it is going to work. That limitation doesn't exist. I'll just ignore the nagging from my flow checker and try actually running that. And if I have a look at the output from this, you can see my flows are sorted. So I've got all the action ones first in the first genre in alphabetical order, and they're subsorted alphabetically by the title. So that's all worked perfectly. So some things work better, some things work worse. So that's sorting. I think it's time to do some filtering in SharePoint just to show how that works. And what we'll do is filter it to show all the ones where the nominations is greater than or equal to 10. It's what I wanted to do for Excel. So my nominations field is called field_4, as you can see. But all I need to do is type field_4, let's say greater than or equal to 10. And although this didn't work for Excel, I think it probably is going to work for SharePoint. So it looks like they put more work into getting OData working for a SharePoint data source than perhaps for an Excel one. And if you look at the output, you can see all these films got more than 10 or more nominations. So that's the basics of sorting and filtering using Excel and SharePoint. Let's have a look now at some of the more advanced things you can do. So what we'll do for some advanced filtering is look at 4 things. We'll show how to test for null values, how to test for dates, how to combine criteria together, and how to use some OData functions. And we'll do it using SharePoint because many of these things won't actually work for Excel. So what I'm going to do is start by showing how to test for null values. Because I don't want to have to reinvent the same wheels, I'm going to save my OData and SharePoint flow. I'm going to rename it as other things you can do with filters. And then after it saves it, what I'll do is go in and make sure it's able to run. I can click on the 3 dots and choose turn on, and then I'll go into editing it. And that saves us all a little bit of time. So I'm going to get items and choose show advanced options, and I'm going to get rid of any filtering or any order by that I've done before. So what I want to do is show all the ones where the genre is null. So I need to remind myself of what the genre is called. It's called field_6. What I could do with this is type in field_6 equals EQ and then just the word null. And if I run that, you should see that it gives me, I hope, an empty table. And the reason for that is there aren't any films with a null genre. Just have a quick look at that. You can see all the genres are filled in. So I'm expecting it to work, but I'm not expecting it to give any output. And sure enough, it doesn't. Although I had to wait 10 seconds, which you didn't see, for that to happen. So what I'm going to do is go and find Titanic, which my colleague Andrew hates, as anyone who's been on his courses will testify. I'm going to edit it. The reason I'm not choosing to edit it in grid view is whenever I do that, it hangs. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. So the genre for that, I'm just going to delete and save my changes. And I now have a genreless film. What I can now do is to go back out of this, and I can run my flow again. And what I should see this time when I run it is that I get a single film, Titanic. Any flow listing Titanic can't be all bad, surely. That's how you can deal with nulls. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to stay with the same flow, is show how to pick up all the films, for example, which were released on or after the 1st of January 2010. Not that many of them, actually. But the problem I've got is the release date isn't actually stored as a date, it's stored as a number. And although I'm sure it's possible somehow to create a column which will translate that into a date, I couldn't find an easy way to do it. So what I'm going to do is cheat slightly. And I'm going to load up a new list, copy the list, but more carefully this time. So I'll create a new list. I'll base it on my Excel file, and I'll upload my list of films. So far, so the same. But with a release date, instead of storing it as a number, I'm going to store it as a date time, and then choose next. And I'll call this films with dates, and choose create. So while it's busy refreshing that, I'm going to go back into my flow and change the source of this. I think I may need to just refresh this. Let's see if I can get it to do that. So I can go back in. Occasionally in this series of tutorials, I'm going to give the impression that my Power Automate is working much quicker than yours. I had to wait 2 or 3 minutes for this to come up. So what I can now do is set a filter, and the filter is going to be that the release date is greater than or equal to the 1st of January 2010. But that begs the question what the release date is called. So what I'm going to do is add it into my list and have a look. It's called field_2. I guess I ought to actually give that a name. So in my filter, I can say where field_2 is greater than or equal to. And the safest and most reliable way to refer to any date is in international format. So you start with a year and then put a / if you want, and then put a month. So I want January, which is 01, and then another / and then 01. And that's a safe way of referring to a date. So let's see if that works. If I now try running that, what you should see is it gives you all the films released on or after the 1st of January 2010. And while there's a lot of them, there aren't quite so many in our database. Now look at the output of that, you'll see all these films are quite recent. Fairly recent anyway, so that's worked. But that's how you can deal with dates. The third thing I was going to do is combine that. So what we'll do is show all the films released on or after the 1st of January 2010 and which are action films. So to do that, I just put and, was it field_6? It was. And field _6 equals, and then I need to put action in single inverted commas. And if I try running this, I should see less films, quite a few less films. I haven't actually checked if there are any. I'm taking a bit of a punt on this one. It's going to be disappointing if there aren't. But if I run that and scroll down, you can see the output of this is an HTML table containing only action films released. Oh, there's quite a lot of them since that date. And you could also use the word or instead of and, but clearly in this case that will give me virtually every single film, because nearly every film was either released after the 1st of January 2010 or equaled action. There's not many exceptions to that. So the final thing I was going to show is an OData function or operator. There's the main ones you can use. I promised you I'd show you all the operators: equals, not equal to, greater than equal to, less than or equal to, and there they are. But you can also choose starts with, contains, and substring of, although that seems to be specific to SharePoint. So what I'm going to do is show all the films which start with the word star. I'm hoping to pick up things like Star Wars. So I'll get rid of my existing filter and type in starts with. There's not much giving me any help with this. So the thing I want to refer to is a field called title, but it's not called, it is called title. So I can just put in title. And I want to find everything which begins with the word star. It's not case sensitive, so I can just put that in any combination of case I like. And if I try running that, you should see that it will give me all the films beginning with a star. Again, I don't actually know how many there are of these. I haven't checked this, but there has to be some, surely. And there they are. Starsky and Hutch, who'd have thought it? So that's a quick guide to some of the more advanced things you can do with filters and OData. What I'd like to do now is show something called dynamic filters. And the example we're going to do is to show all the films which were released in the last, let's say, 5,000 days. What I'd like to do is to be able to create a variable to hold what the date was 5,000 days ago, and then reference that in my filter. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to add a variable. So if I click on add an action, and I'll choose initialize variable. And I'll set my variable called, let's call it reference date. And it's going to be a string of text. You might have expected that to be a date, but it's actually going to hold the date as a string format: year, month, day. As to the value it's going to hold, this is going to be the first of the complicated expressions we'll create. There's a function in Power Automate called UTC now, which will give today's date. What I want to do is not give today's date, but give what it was 5,000 days ago. So I can choose the add days function and add minus 5,000 days to that. And that will give me what the date was 5,000 days ago as a date. But I want to store it as a string of text. So what I'm going to do now is to apply the format date time function. Could I type? Which will take that date and format it nicely. In this case, in the format YYYY-MM-DD. And you'll notice that you need to use capital letters. It's quite common in Microsoft software to refer to the month. Now, if you're wondering where I got all these functions from, I could have looked in all the different categories to find them. So there, for example, is UTC now and got more help on them. And we may do that in a subsequent tutorial. For the moment, I just want to get this working. So I'm hoping that when I run this, that will contain the date as it was 5,000 days ago. So what I can do is go to my get items task, and I can filter it to show it where the reference date, which is, no, I'm going to have to go and look at it here, the release date rather, field_2. I should have remembered that, where field_2 is greater than or equal to the value of my variable. So what I can now do is click on variable data, reference date, and it will substitute that in. If I now run this quite clever little query, clever little flow, I guess, though I say so myself, then what I should see is a subset of all the films, but in fact I see an error message. And the reason is, can you see, if I can zoom in on this or show it, I've missed out the inverted commas. So what I need to do is edit this and go back into my filter expression. And I need to put, this needs to be done carefully, a single inverted comma there and a single inverted comma there to complete my syntax. Because it's a string of text, I need to include it in quotation marks. And although it's being returned as a string of text, it doesn't come in with the quotation marks. And this time when I run it, it's working, and I can see all the films released in the last 5,000 days. And that looks fairly plausible. If I look at my initialized variable and look at the results of this, you can actually see that 5,000 days ago was the 15th of December 2009. But the beauty of this is that will change over time as the value of my variable changes. So for the final part of this tutorial, something which I feel I should probably have told you right at the very beginning, which is how to use experimental features to help write your OData. I think when you see this, you'll probably curse me. So I can click on the settings button and choose to view all my Power Automate settings. And I can do something we did in an earlier tutorial as well and turn on my experimental features. Now at this point, it will reload the web page, so you will lose any changes you've made to this flow, but I'd already saved everything in it. If I then go into my into my Get Items task and have a look at the advanced options, how beautiful is this? Not only can I see what the operators are, I don't have to remember they're called GE or GT or whatever it may be, but most importantly, when I click on the drop arrow, I can see what the fields are called, so I don't have to remember the field numbers. So I think while I wasn't that big a fan of the experimental features where for the expression editor, for OData editing, it's a must. But I must be honest, I don't do a great deal of OData editing when I'm writing my Power Automate flows, and I don't like using experimental features because they may disappear at any time. Indeed, that's exactly what this message says. So I'm going to turn them back off again.